When our kids were littler, still pretty little, but when they were even smaller, we found ourselves just being overwhelmed by the pile of stuff they had. And by stuff, I mean like the number of pieces of toys, of games, of things that would just be all over the place. And we walked downstairs into our family room, and which has often then become the kids' toy room, essentially. And it's like, how do you dance around this? And, you're looking out for the almighty Lego that's going to zap you from anywhere. And it was coming up to Christmas time, and Tiffany and I, my wife and I, looked at each other like, this is nuts. Like, how are we going to take more into our house right now? We're already ready to blow up this thing. Like, how do we do this? And, we were just fortunate. Our grandparents, aunts, uncles, family, friends, they just are blessing our kids with a lot of stuff. But yet it can be overwhelming when it's all got to fit in our house. And so, what do we do about that? And so we started to think, and we came up with this idea. What if we just stopped getting them gifts? So that's what we did. We haven't got them anything for a number of years now. Now, we didn't just not get them anything. We tried to be a little strategic about it. What we did was, instead of spending money on the gifts, we took that and put it into a separate account. We're like, how do we do something bigger? How do we do something like more meaningful and significant? And as we're watching a bunch of little girls play dress up and acting out princesses and things like that, the logical thing came to our minds. Like, well, let's save up for Disney. Like, how cool would that be to give them that experience, watch the joy on their faces? And so we set up an account. We labeled it the Disney Fund. And every birthday and Christmas, we just started dumping money into that. Well, a few years went by, and we started to think about, like, okay, how much longer is it going to take to be able to save up? We're a few years out kind of a thing. And as Tiffany and I were talking about it, we were like, I wonder if this is the best use of this money. And I wonder if this is going to be, it'd be fun and all, but I wonder if this is what we're supposed to do. And so we took it to the Lord, and we just kind of started praying and talking about it and saying, what are we supposed to do with this? And we came up with our first idea. We've always had the ambition to be able to go back to China and visit one of our daughter's orphanages. At one point, when we were able to go there and bring her home, we were able to visit one, but not the one that she spent the majority of time with. So we thought, how cool would it be to be able to take a family there someday? And we started to punch numbers, and we're like, okay, that's a lot more years of saving. Maybe that one's not it. But as then we started to talk, and we got this idea. What if we go and introduce them to the friends and missionary partners that we've grown to love in Panama? Now, we have been going there for 5 years now, since 2018, and at some point in this 2018, 19, 20 experience of looking at how do we put funds towards something, our hearts just started shifting as we were talking with Jesus about it to say, I might have something different for you. And so about 2 years ago, we start looking at this fund and figuring out how much we have, and we're like, in 2 years, I'll be on sabbatical. And so that gives us an opportunity. Let's start gearing up for that. And so that's what we did. Many of you may have known I've been gone. Some of you were like, oh, did you actually leave? I didn't even miss you. But I've been gone for a while. In the first 12 days of our sabbatical, from July 10th till 22nd, we spent it as a family of 7 in Panama. And so as I'm reflecting on that time, and I have the opportunity to come back and see the text that I was given for this morning in Psalm 127, I'm like, man, this fits. And this is good for me to wrestle with and unpack a little bit. And so here's a title that I messaged this morning. I said, it's Living for the Next Generation. The title of the message, Living for the Next Generation. I think it's what Psalm 127 puts before us. And we're going to dive into that this morning. And now, if you're opening your Bible, one of the things you might notice about Psalm 127 is it has a couple of headings. The first one, it says Psalm 127 is a song of ascent. And so Psalm 120 through 134 are all considered songs of ascent, meaning these were things that were going to be sang as people marched their way to Jerusalem. Now, it didn't matter whether you're north, south, east, or west from Jerusalem, you were going up. It was an ascent, because the topography of Jerusalem was that it was in the mountainous region. So people from any direction would say, we are going up to Jerusalem, also referencing the fact that it's the holy city. So generally, we're thinking of heavenly things, and God as being up, and so did they. So they were going to be taking their pilgrimage, their ascent up to Jerusalem. Now, one of the other things you may notice in your Bible, it says it's a song of Solomon. So Solomon has written the Proverbs, he's written the book of Ecclesiastes, a couple of the Psalms, and the book of Proverbs itself is known as the book of wisdom. And Solomon was a very wise man, known as one of the wisest to ever walk this planet. You see, one of the things that God said is, Solomon, out of anything that you want, what can I give you? And Solomon replied, I'd like wisdom to be able to care for your people. And so God said, I'll give it to you in abundance. And so he made him a very wise man. And now Solomon shares his wisdom in some of his writings. And so he's going to talk to us about how do we live for the next generation? What wisdom can we glean from that? And the first thing he's going to tell us is that living with wisdom means we are going to build a life with Jesus. Our foundation is him. And so if we turn to Psalm 127, we'll go through the first 2 verses. Unless the Lord builds a house, they who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord guards a city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is futile for you to rise up early, to stay up late, to eat the bread of painful labor. This is how he gives to his beloved sleep. And he's talking about it's a life built on Jesus. It's our homes. It's who we are, what we do, it's how our marriages are run, how our families operate. Are they founded on Jesus? Then he elaborates into our cities. And now, not that much different, but especially in 10th century BC when Solomon wrote this, I mean, the city, we weren't leaving a whole lot. I mean, these guys, they didn't have transportation. They weren't commuting to work. They weren't driving all over. They weren't driving into the next city for entertainment. I mean, you're hoofing it. You're walking. And so everything was happening in the city. That meant your house is in the city. Your family is in the city. Your neighbors, all your relationships are in the city. Your schools, your doctors, your market, your jobs. Everything going on is in the city. And so this is a life that Solomon's saying. We need to build it all around Jesus, all we do, and who we are. It's all about building a life on Jesus. Because he says, if it's not, it's in vain. Let me share with you again, reading verses 1 and 2. Unless the Lord builds a house, they who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord guards a city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It says, it is futile. It's the same Hebrew word as these others. It's just translated differently. It's futile for you to rise up early, to stay up late, to eat the bread of painful labor. This is how he gives to his beloved sleep. This word vain is a significant one. In the Hebrew dictionary, it would define it this way. Having no real value. It's empty, worthless. That which has no result or use and is worthless. Not producing the desired result. If our homes, if our lives, if our cities are not based on and built on Jesus, it is worthless, meaningless. And Jesus echoed this. In John's Gospel in chapter 15 and verse 5, Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, it doesn't mean we can do absolutely nothing, because we all know without God, or even for us who would say we have God, even without us putting a lot of significance on God, we can have a house, we can have a marriage, we can have kids, we can have a life, we can have careers, and we can do all of those things. And it just says that in the end, they're pretty meaningless. They're pretty worthless if it's not built on God. And so Solomon writes this to us. He understands the significance of building a house on God and for God. He was commissioned by God to build the first temple in Jerusalem. You know, King David, his father, wanted to build it, but God said, no, it's actually going to be your son who's going to do it. And so he set out to build a temple. So he did it in 7 years with over 150,000 workers and built this massive, beautiful temple because he understood the magnitude and the beauty of who God is. So he built him a temple. He put the whole idea, the foundation on building his life, his temple, his kingdom, and who God is, at least for many of the days of his life. See, Solomon didn't always stay built on Jesus. He started to sway a little bit, actually. He built his home. It took him 13 years because it was so massive. Why did he need such a massive home? Well, during his fall from God, he didn't have just one wife, or two or three, but roughly 1,000. He discredited what the Bible had said. He started to go away from what God said in Deuteronomy and said men should be a one-wife man, and he upped that by a few. And so he had 700 wives, 300 concubines. Concubines are like a less-than status wife, usually because they have been enslaved prior. And so he starts walking away from the Lord. And the ramifications of that, his kingdom started facing attacks on all sides. He's constantly at war. And then when he handed down his kingship to his son Rehoboam after he had died, he felt the same. Kingdom attacked until ultimately it divided. And the effect of whether or not we're walking with the Lord or not. 1 Kings 11:4 described it this way. It said, "For when Solomon is old, his wives turned his heart to follow other gods. And his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of his father David had been." It's easy to get off track. Solomon allowed not only his sin of marrying multiple women take over, but they allowed him to be turned away from his God. It's a life built on God. He started out well, just got shaken. Which leads me to say, why do we build our houses anyway? Why do we build our cities? Why do we strive to have a safe community? Why do we work so hard to earn a living? Well, these songs of ascent throughout have a common theme. It's about one thing: peace. Because when we build a life on God, we can have peace. We can have contentment. We can have joy. And we can have safety and security in Him. Without Him, we lack, and we'll always be missing something. While on our family trip in Panama, one of the days we were going to a school downtown in Panama City called Juntos Podemos. And as our missionary friend Matt was driving our family there, all 8 of us in one vehicle, he was starting to describe some things around him. He's like, "Now, girls, you guys have been to some of the villages. You've seen some of the parts of Panama. And now you've seen the city, which is very much like any of our big cities. It's first world big cities, Panama City. He goes, but start to pay attention as we're driving. You'll notice we're starting to go into more of an impoverished area of Panama City." And he's like, "It's a little bit of a rougher part of town. A little bit more crime happens here. And it's not as safe of an area. So I'm just going to give you the heads up that once we pull up, we're going to the school, you'll stay in the vehicle. We'll wait until the guard checks us in. He'll open the gate. We'll pull in. The gate will close behind, and then we can leave the vehicle." Well, a bunch of little girls hearing this start to have questions. Why? What kind of crime? What's going on? Where are you taking us that there's going to be a gate? And why do we need security? And they start going through all the questions of trying to figure out what kind of an area Matt's leading us into. And so Matt starts to elaborate on things, and he starts to kind of downplay the crime. He's like, "Well, mostly it's crimes of opportunity," which means people are poor. They need food. They need some money. So they're just looking to try to maybe hold somebody up and get some cash quick and go. So it's not that bad. Well, that still sounds scary to some young kids. And so finally he says it this way. He says, "Look, guys, would I take you somewhere that's not safe? Would you trust me enough to believe that I'm not going to endanger anybody?" He said, "I've been here many, many, many times. I take my family and my kids here. Just trust me in that. We're safe." And I think my kids were still not convinced. They're like, "We've only known you a couple days, buddy. I don't know about this." And so they continue to ask with questions. And I liked his response after that. Because he said, "You know what? At some point in all of our lives, we have to make a decision that we're going to trust God. We're going to trust Him for our safety. We're going to trust Him for our security. We're going to trust Him that He is in this." And as we went in and we got to work with the kids that day and experience Juntos Podemos, I think we were all clear in going, you know what? God is at work in this place. Because this right now doesn't make sense. They've got churches sponsoring these kids in here in this school to employ staff in the middle of a rough part of Panama City. And these kids are getting an education and learning, and now they've got a shot at getting out of this life, which so many of them are living in. God is at work in this place. We trust God for it and with it. And so we just have to ask ourselves, do we trust God with our lives? Do we believe that He is in our lives and we want to hold Him near and dear and we trust Him with it? Because verse 2 tells us about the trap that we all fall into. Whether we're Christians or not, in particular, those of us who have put their faith in Jesus, there's a trap that we can fall into. Psalm 127 verse 2 says, "It is futile for you to rise up early, to stay up late, to eat the bread of painful labor. This is how he gives to his beloved sleep." Let me share with you the NLT translation because I think it spells it out in a little bit more clear way. "It is useless for you to work so hard from early morning until late at night, anxiously working for food to eat, for God gives rest to his loved ones." You feel that one at all? What he's trying to do, I think, is set up exactly what they're feeling and what we're feeling today. Anybody feel like sometimes that we're just in the rat race? And that we are so busy with our lives that we're trying to climb the corporate ladder. We're trying to buy the bigger, the newer, whatever it is, keeping up with our neighbors or the Joneses. We want to try to get the next success or achievement. And that then pretty soon we look at our calendars and we're like, man, I'm governed by that more than I am governing it. And then it leads to anxiousness and restlessness. Any of us anxious and restless this morning? Well, Solomon has a response to that. He says that it's time to allow God to do what he can do. He's not just suggesting like, all right, hey, everybody go home, sit on the couch, grab a bag of potato chips, put your feet up and watch movies for the next week. Like, just let God do it. No, Solomon is actually very much about hard work. All throughout the book of Proverbs that he wrote, he's all talking about, no, we need to work and work hard. We've actually been made to work. But it is in vain, it is futile, it is worthless if we're working for ourselves and not for God. There's a big difference in how we work. Because if we're working with God and for God, then we can rest easy. And so I know there's a lot of us out here that are working with God. We're working for God, and we're still feeling this way. So let me share a little nugget of truth with you that he gets at the last part. Now, I'm going to say it a little differently, and you might at first be taken a little aback by it, but let's see how it hits. When we're worried, when we're anxious, when we're nervous about life and doing this life, something I often tell myself, you're just not that important. When I'm worried about things, when I'm stressed about things, especially if God's in it, I just tell Brian, you're just not that important. Like, God's not up there going, hey, if Brian drops the ball on this one, I'm done for. Like, I'm putting all my trust into Brian, and so if he doesn't do things the way I've got, if he fumbles this one, what am I going to do? And sometimes I act like that, though, like I'm so important. Man, if it's God's plan, I just get to be part of it. I get to walk with him. I get to do what he allows me to do. But too often I try to put it into my own strength and my own abilities. And that's not a life built on Jesus. A life built on Jesus puts our house, our city, and our lives in his hands. We do our job, and we let him do his. And if we do that, I believe what Solomon's suggesting is that if we live a life built on Jesus, that will lead to a generation raised on Jesus. If we build our lives on Jesus today, it will lead to a generation that will be raised on Jesus. Now, before I get too much further ahead, I want to suggest something. That this text is certainly going to be talking about the kids within our homes, but let me elaborate on this as we're talking about a generational impact. Now, we can see a generational impact not just with kids, or at least our own, not just with other kids, but with adults, with peers, with people older than us. How can that be? Well, let me give an example of faith groups. Our small group ministry that we love to put people together to do life together with the purpose of growing in relationship with each other and growing in relationship with God. Let's grow closer to God together. And if we have our faith group leaders and they meet with people over consecutive years, how awesome is it when their spiritual kids say, you know what would like to do? You know what I feel like I'm compelled to do? I'm compelled to kind of branch off from this faith group, and I'm going to start one because I want to pour into some other people. And it's time that I have some spiritual kids now. I've done this journey for a while. And then you have the first faith group leaders that had kids and now grandkids. It's a generational impact that we can have. But it all starts with a life that is based on Jesus, a life that is built on him. And leads to a generation raised on him. Let's turn back to Psalm 127, starting in verse 3. Behold, Solomon writes, children are a gift of the Lord. And some of us need to be reminded of that this morning. You might have come in here on a rough day or a rough week, and you need to hear that and be like, yeah, I'll repeat it to myself. Children are a gift, they're a gift, they're a gift. And this week, my wife and I were still around the oven, and we're bringing food over to the kitchen table. We had called our girls all to the table. It's getting time to eat. And one of them's kind of singing in the background. And then she says, hey, Dad, I know how to spell millennial. I know the millennial song. I'm like, okay. And so she starts singing. M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-A-L, gotta love millennials. There's a song that was made kind of popular. It hit YouTube stardom a number of years ago, ultimately picking on millennials. But if you don't mind that and check it out later, you might come to enjoy it as I have. So as she's singing this and celebrating the fact that she knows how to spell millennial, one of my other daughters goes, what's a millennial? That question didn't bother me. It was the response. Old people. Yeah, honey, you're a gift. Children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are children of one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies at the gate. Especially in 10th century BC, I would suggest more than today, children were considered a true gift. And the more, the merrier. You see, they were useful in two different ways. They were considered defenders and attackers. They were good on defense and on offense. So as this text suggests, there's something going on at the gate. And even for Solomon, some theologians would suggest that maybe this was a time that he was facing some sort of civil attacks or some sort of attacks on the family name, and that what happens is then you're able to send out your children, and they defend you at the gate. The gate was like the hub of the city. And this is where all life happens. So this is where any business deals are done. This is land transactions are done. This is where laws were made. And this is where civil suits were determined. So if somebody's got an issue with somebody, they bring it to the gate. And those that can hear it, and they give them what's going to happen. And so this gate is very important. And so whenever the family line is at risk in civil pursuits or something like that, they have children to defend them. See, the gate is also going to be an important thing in battle. Because any city that's being attacked gets attacked at the gate because it's the weakest point. And so if a king has many subjects, many defenders, they're more likely to withstand the battle. And those with few would struggle. And so they're suggesting that many children here, they can defend at the gates from attacks. Now, it's also offense. Kids can go on offense. Because when it references an arrow is an offensive weapon. See, if we're getting attacked at a gate in 10th century BC, we're probably dealing with some sort of armor and swords and spears. It's a close battle. When we would go and attack, there's going to be archers with arrows launching those things from as far as they can. And so this is an offensive weapon. Now, what it's suggesting here to us in the 10th century BC and us today is that kids can extend our influence into the world. If our goal is to magnify the kingdom, is to elaborate and to open up the kingdom doors, then many kids can help to go and do that in all sorts of areas. We can send them out on attack. And we also know, like with these 10th century archers, 10th century BC archers, man, those arrows were hard to come by. I mean, that was a process. So they have to first pick out the wood, they have to then whittle it down, and they continue to reshape and check to try to get that true. And then you're attaching feathers, and you're working it over and over to try and get it to fly well. And you're having to get some sort of a tip and try to work the metal over. I mean, this is not something like nowadays that you just go and buy. Like, this is a process. It takes a long time to get an arrow ready. I'd love to share with you guys some pictures of my arrows from our trip to Panama, just to give you a little bit more of a taste of what we were able to experience. And then some of the places that we visited, the first stop that we made was at an orphanage. Now, this orphanage is pretty special. They deal strictly with There's children with special needs and severe ones. The majority of the kids are wheelchair-bound. The story behind this orphanage is worth the price of going alone. And so we go in first, and there's a director there, and for probably 45 minutes, she gives us the history of God at work in building this orphanage through a couple from North Carolina who had infertility issues. And they had struggled to get pregnant. And so they were searching for, how do we build a family? And they went to Panama and understood the laws there were really restrictive, and they really didn't do a good job taking care of their orphans and kids with needs. And so they thought that is their new mission. So they uprooted and moved to Panama. She has a lawyer background, so she started working on changing laws in Panama. And so over years, what they were able to do is buy this building, raise enough money, get a staff who just are devoted to the Lord and devoted to kids, and they do an amazing work. And then so after hearing about all this and God's continued provision for this orphanage, we got to go and play with some of these kids. And so our kids were intermingling with some of their kids, and it was really sweet to be able to watch and see the ladies there in maroon or some of the therapists there that are working with them. And we had to go in different rooms and go and help with lunch and feeding some of the kids and interacting with them. So I'll tell you, what a blessing to be able to watch my kids being fully hands-on in the ministry. And I've been able to do this in the past, but it's a different level when it's your kids getting to do it. You know, the next day we went over to school, the Juntos Podemos that I mentioned. She doesn't look all that thrilled right now because it's over 100 degrees and she just got done moving cinder blocks for the last hour. One of the things that we originally did, they're getting ready to do a plumbing and building a bathroom project, so we're moving stuff, and it's hard work and it's sweat, and she got to work out there. Their guns are getting built up. I didn't get any pictures of the work of the cinder blocks, but just of the aftermath. But after that, we had this cool opportunity then to jump into classrooms. And so there are kids trying to break through language barriers, try to communicate with some level of Spanish, which is very, very little, and doing some art projects with them and talking with them. And we got to kind of sit down with them in classroom. You know, to be able to see a couple other ones jumping in and being able to do stuff, man. I'll tell you what, for the area of school that they live on, to watch smiles on their faces is pretty remarkable, knowing that the lives that they're leading outside of that school. God is at work in this place. You keep going to the next one, and the girls just kind of having a blast with those kids. Another thing we got to do is go into the Lidise. Some of you guys are familiar with that because we were able to go into the church where we spent a lot of time. We spent 3 different days in Lidise. And let me just tell you about this cool picture. So this is after church on Sunday. Basically for our benefit, Pastor Moises not only preached but had a translator in English, but then he called up all of the people, all the children that happened to be there that Sunday who were part of the Global Fingerprints Child Sponsorship Program that we have part of in Faith Church. So many years ago, some of you guys still have kids that you sponsor in Panama, and it might be some of these kids right here. So he calls them up, and then one by one, he kind of highlights the kid, and he says, and this is Mom with him. Let me tell you about Mom. Mom started coming because the kid's been involved in our program here through the sponsorship program, and Mom just got baptized 2 months ago. Let me tell you about the next kid. This is Grandma. Grandma had never had her faith in Jesus until about 1 year ago. She started coming because her kid came. And he goes down the line, one after another, talking about the impact of their sponsorship program has on not only the kids, but on the families. And so he also asked me to extend my thanks to all of the support that they get from all of us here at Faith Church, because it makes a difference. And a beautiful thing that they also then did, they called all of us up and they prayed for us before we could leave. The whole church did. It was a blessed day. Other opportunities we had with those kids, those same kids, the sponsorship program, they're getting involved with our games. I love our kids just getting involved, grabbing hands and doing stuff. Pastor Moises with a smile and a background in a blue shirt, just watching it happen, watching cultures come together, all because of God. And we see them playing. I think Cambria's next. Didn't take much for this little one to bond to anybody. She's an extrovert and loves people. And even though they couldn't understand each other, they figured it out. And the next picture helps that say too. You know, smiles cross culture. God can do a work in our hearts that allow for that to happen. You can fast forward to one more. Breaking of bread. We had the opportunity to take Pastor Moises and his family and some of the church leaders out for lunch during one of the days. I just love the conversations that we were able to try to have together. Rest, relaxation, rejuvenation, and relationship. and the opportunity that we had to do that. So I showed you a lot of pictures of what my kids were involved in, because that was the point. Let me show us some of the stuff that I didn't show you earlier. That's maybe a little bit more, I'll call it behind the scenes. Because sometimes in life, when we're working with our arrows, we have to grab a hand. We have to help through mud and muck. Same as the next one. Each kid at their own pace and at their own level, trying to figure out what kind of support they need. And because the ultimate goal is take them through the mud so then they're on dry land on their own. Let me show you another picture. The picture I didn't show before, that our kids were at the orphanage playing with the kids and interacting with the kids and getting involved, is my wife, Tiffany, leading the way. Here's what it looks like, guys. You can just grab their hand. She's willing. And let's help them out. Let's move together. Sometimes we're shaping the arrows. And we're whittling them down. And when we're doing that, we're showing them how it's done. We have to lead the way. And then we went into a boat ride, which is literally a hollowed-out log with a little kicker motor on the back, but an hour-long trek to get to the Emberadura village, which is a remote village where they live without electricity. I mean, it's hot. It's very native and indigenous. And so when we were able to get there, and we were able to meet a lot of the kids there who are also sponsored by the Global Fingerprints program from another church. So God's at work there, and we get there, and our kids are going to experience culture very, very differently. And so they start playing some music, they start singing, and there's a time, and I know this because I've been there a number of times, that they are going to ask people to get up and start dancing with you. And so I thought, if my kids are going to get out of their comfort zone, it's time to show them. So I'm not just stationary, I'm actually moving and I'm busting a groove as much as I can, and as the Ember has taught me. And then what I don't have a picture of either, because I stayed on the dance floor, is my kids that followed suit. You know, the thing that I'm reflecting on in this, and in Psalm 127, is all about my arrows. Because sometimes we dance and show them how to do it, and that it's okay to break through our comfort zone. And sometimes we grab them and we pull them through the mud, or we help them and give them a hand, or we teach them the way. But the ultimate goal is to then say, go. Go and play. Go and interact. Go and smile. Go and work with these kids. You know, we have arrows in this life. Whether they're our kids or others' kids or other adults, but it's not as simple as buying them at any little toy store. It takes time and precision and hard work to build an arrow to the point where it's actually able to then go into the quiver. Because 10th century BC archers knew that this thing wasn't ready for the quiver until it was ready to fly. But when it's ready to fly, when it's ready to do its thing, it goes in. And then here's the thing that I come to know about arrows. I don't know much. The extent of my knowledge is a toy. But as I play with this week, I'm starting to go, you know what I can do? When this thing's in my hand, I can point it in a lot of different directions. You can go down or up, or you can go left or right. I mean, this thing I've got some control over yet. I can still reshape it if it needs to. But at some point, our goal is to let that thing fly. Here's the thing I also realized at this point. I no longer have control over which way the arrow goes. The arrow's been sent out into the world to do what it's been trained to do what it's been carved and niched away to do. Our time with our arrows is quite limited. The time we have to shape, to nurture, is fleeting us. As I've learned to try to base my life on years, I've also learned that when I base them off kids' years, it goes pretty quick. And so the question that we kind of close with today, as we're talking about a life built on Jesus, so it can lead to a generation raised on Jesus, is how are we doing at preparing our arrows? And we can aim them, we can nurture them, and then we can let them go into the world. You know the cool thing about having a bunch of arrows is we can send them off in multiple different directions, and they can do way more than we could ever do. They can go further than we could ever go. They can go in different directions than we could ever go. And the truth is that our legacy, our life, does not stop at the grave, but it leads for generations beyond. And that legacy is determined by how we live today. Are we building our lives on Jesus so that this next generation is raised on him? Our faith is not meant to be kept alone. It is meant to be shared. What kind of life are we leading today? Father, we pray. And often days I think I plead and beg for your help in living a life that is found on you so that we can raise the next generation. And Father, we may need reminders that our kids are blessing some days, and on those days we ask for your strength and endurance. And oftentimes we need your wisdom, so may we be like Solomon and ask for that. And yet we give you control. We want to live our lives open-handed and say, God, would you do a work? Can we do what we can do, but allow you to do what you can do so we can trust you and be at peace? And these are our requests. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.